There is a moment in every man's life when the world whispers, when the subtle undertones of society's scripts press against his mind, when the theater of obligation and expectation demands a choice he does not fully understand. It comes quietly at first, a flicker, a suggestion disguised as desire, the promise of companionship, of safety, of a bond sanctified by ritual and law. And many men step into it as if into light, blind to the shadows that linger just beyond the edges. But if you look closely, if you pierce the veil of illusion, you will see the machinery that waits the trap of conventionality, the erosion of autonomy, the quiet surrender of sovereignty. To marry is to exchange one form of freedom for another, far more insidious, the freedom to choose, the freedom to err, the freedom to rise, the freedom to fall without chains. Every man has a life, a vision, a pulse of purpose that beats uniquely within him. And yet, the institution of marriage asks him subtly to fold that rhythm into the expectations of another, to negotiate the architecture of his soul for a space that is neither fully his nor fully shared, but rather a compromise of both. It is a compromise few realize is a prison until the walls have been built, brick by quiet brick. History is strewn with the ruins of men who surrendered too early. Philosophers, warriors, thinkers, creators, some lost to love, others lost to the weight of obligation, masquerading as duty. Machiavelli wrote of power and its preservation, and in those pages lies a warning. When a man relinquishes control of his own destiny, when he yields the compass of his life to external influence, he becomes vulnerable not to enemies, not to the world, but to the quiet erosion of himself. Marriage, with its promises of intimacy and permanence, can act as that erosion, cloaked in sweetness, its true architecture designed to demand more than it gives. And yet society celebrates this surrender as virtue. It paints the ritual as a pinnacle, as the apex of masculine achievement, as the fulfillment of desire. But there is a shadow beneath every gilded celebration, the sacrifice of time, the sacrifice of freedom, the sacrifice of the singular self. Men who marry often find their energy, once wild and uncontainable, now siphoned into negotiations, compromises, and the careful management of emotions not entirely their own. The poet Nietzsche once wrote that a man should live dangerously, that he should risk all to feel the intensity of existence. And yet, in the quietly ticking rooms of domestic life, the dangerous, intoxicating fire of autonomy is often reduced to embers, carefully managed, carefully moderated, carefully muted. There is no judgment here, only observation. For the path of marriage is not inherently evil. It is an architecture of choices, an expression of alignment, but it is a path that demands from a man a surrender he may not be prepared to give. And before he gives it, he must ask himself, am I willing to trade the infinite landscape of my life for the security of expectation? Am I willing to measure every step of ambition against the silent ledger of approval, to weigh my desires against the invisible scales of duty? To marry is to bind not just two hearts, but two systems, two lives, two energies. And a man who does not first know the depth and intensity of his own pulse risks losing it entirely. Consider the mind unfettered, a sharp blade of possibility. When a man is unbound, he thinks freely, moves freely, creates freely. He pursues vision without negotiation, learns without compromise, challenges without hesitation. But when the invisible chains of expectation are applied, every thought, every impulse, every moment of daring brilliance is filtered through another's lens, weighed against another's needs, measured against the subtle but insistent gravity of shared responsibility. The mind, once sharp and untamed, becomes tempered, not dull, but restrained, not broken, but confined. And some men, visionaries, creators, adventurers, cannot endure such a prison without losing the essence of themselves. There is also the economy of emotion to consider. Time and energy are finite resources. and the institution of marriage consumes them in ways often invisible at the start. The demands are quiet at first. A request here, a compromise there, a negotiation that seems trivial but compounds daily. And gradually, the landscape of your inner life, the very terrain of your emotional autonomy, is reshaped. You no longer live entirely in the freedom of your own design. Your priorities are measured, moderated, and moderated again. The fire of instinct, the joy of spontaneity, the intensity of singular vision, these are gradually attenuated because life, in shared form, is never lived in pure singularity. It is lived in compromise, in negotiation, in management of expectations that are not your own. This is not to say that all companionship is a trap, nor that intimacy is an enemy. True connection, true alignment exists outside and within the bounds of ritual. But marriage, as a social institution, carries with it an architecture designed to demand more than it gives from men who do not carefully prepare. And preparation is rare, because society does not prepare men, it seduces them with the illusion of completion, with the promise of fulfillment, with the soft language of love and duty. It does not show the quiet erosion of time, the siphoning of ambition, the subtle reshaping of identity. And so men walk willingly into a system they barely understand, thinking they are ascending, when often they are quietly ceding the very essence that makes them unstoppable. Freedom is the first law of power, and autonomy is the axis upon which life turns. A man who marries without full awareness is not merely entering a contract, he is negotiating the terms of his existence, often unknowingly. Every decision, every dream, every plan becomes a shared commodity, subjected to debate, negotiation, and compromise. And compromise, while noble in its context, is the slow, almost invisible wearing away of singular purpose. It is not dramatic, it is quiet, it is insidious. And when it accumulates, when the years pass, when the soul feels heavier than it once did, the realization dawns. The price of union is far higher than the promise of love. A man must understand this before he steps forward. Life does not reward the passive. It does not bend in favor of comfort, of security, of expectation. It rewards the sovereign, the relentless, the one who moves with clarity, who acts with intent, who measures every action not against the ledger of approval, but against the compass of his own vision. Marriage, in its conventional form, asks a man to share that compass, to negotiate the very direction of his life, to yield to forces that may not align with his deepest drive. And there are men whose destiny cannot tolerate such negotiation. For them, compromise is a poison, subtle and cumulative, eroding the edges of brilliance until they no longer recognize the reflection in the mirror. Consider the ancient philosophers, the warriors, the artists whose lives burned with intensity. Did they find their power in union? Or did they find it in solitude, in focus, in the freedom to pursue the highest expression of self without constraint? Every man who wishes to rise, who wishes to build a legacy, who wishes to command life rather than be consumed by it, must weigh carefully. Can I risk surrendering the autonomy that fuels my purpose for the security that marriage promises? The answer is rarely simple, because society conditions men to equate surrender with love, to believe that safety is greater than freedom, to imagine that shared life is always superior to unbound life. But history whispers a different truth. The men who change the world, the men who achieve, the men who leave a mark, often do so precisely because they did not surrender prematurely, because they preserved the wild, untamed core of themselves long enough to see the world not as it demanded they see it, but as it truly is. And so the warning is not cruel, it is vital. To marry without mastery of self is to invite subtle erosion. It is to negotiate the terms of your existence with someone who, however loving, cannot bear the full weight of your singular vision. It is to invite compromise at the very moment when you should be asserting clarity, discipline, and relentless focus. Life is short, and energy is finite, and every day spent negotiating emotional minutiae, every hour spent balancing expectations that are not your own, every moment spent tempering ambition for the sake of shared convenience, is a moment not spent pursuing your highest trajectory. Imagine a life unbound. Imagine the power of waking each day with absolute sovereignty over your choices. The air tastes different when you breathe it without chains. The mind moves differently when it is not filtered through obligation. Every decision is yours, every vision is yours, every risk, every reward, every fall, every triumph belongs to no one but you. There is an intensity in this life, a raw electric charge that cannot exist when energy is constantly divided. The man who marries without foresight surrenders this intensity. He does not see it vanish immediately. It fades slowly, quietly, a candle's flame eaten by shadow. But the man who understands the cost preserves it, cultivates it, wields it, and in doing so becomes a force the world cannot ignore. There is also the subtle economy of influence to consider. In marriage, the external world, friends, family, culture, rarely interacts with the man alone. They interact with him through the filter of his bond, through the lens of shared expectations, through the subtle gravity of his commitments. Every word spoken, every action taken, every choice is refracted through this prism. And for a man whose mission is clarity, who seeks vision uncorrupted by external noise, this is a distortion too costly to accept. He cannot measure the world by his own terms if his life has been refracted through someone else's expectations, however innocent they may seem. The vision becomes blurred, the path less certain, the power less absolute. And yet, the allure of marriage is seductive. It promises intimacy, connection, validation, and security. It speaks in the language of instinct, of desire, of comfort. It masks itself as completion, as fulfillment, as the pinnacle of life's journey. But the man who understands the architecture of human nature sees through the mask. He sees the subtle siphoning of energy, the quiet reshaping of priorities, the slow, almost invisible erosion of autonomy. He sees that true mastery, true sovereignty requires the preservation of self above all else. It requires the cultivation of purpose before the pursuit of companionship. It requires the audacity to prioritize freedom, clarity, and vision over the fleeting allure of union. And so the man who never marries, or who delays it until mastery is absolute, walks differently. He moves with intent. He chooses with precision. He directs the course of his life with a discipline that few ever attain. He understands that connection can exist without compromise, that intimacy can exist without surrender, that love can exist without the surrender of power. He navigates the world with a freedom so absolute that it shapes reality itself. And in this freedom, he finds the highest expression of himself, not as a reflection of another's expectations, not as a shadow of societal demands, but as an unbroken, untouchable force. Marriage is not the enemy. Oblivion is not inevitable. Compromise is not always poison. But ignorance is fatal. A man who enters marriage unprepared, without mastery, without sovereignty, without the depth of self-awareness required to preserve his essence, risks losing more than companionship. He risks losing the very core that makes him unstoppable. He risks the slow erosion of brilliance, the quiet surrender of power, the diminishment of vision. And the world does not wait for the man who has compromised too much. The world rewards the sovereign, the relentless, the unbound. To understand this is to confront the deepest truths of human nature. To confront it is to stare into the mirror of your own potential and realize that most men will never see themselves fully. Most men will never claim the heights that are theirs to take. Most men will surrender their vitality, piece by piece, until they are shadows moving through a world of shadows. And marriage, in its conventional form, is a crucible that reveals this surrender. It is not inherently destructive, but it is revealing. It strips the man of pretense. It tests his mastery. It measures the precision of his self-possession against the gravity of shared obligation. And in that measurement, the unprepared falter. The world has always been unkind to those who compromise before their mastery is complete. Nietzsche wrote of the Übermensch, a figure unbound by the dictates of morality imposed from outside, who creates values, who imposes order on chaos, who lives with a sovereignty so total that he is untouchable even by the force of gods and men. This is the archetype every man must confront, not as a distant ideal, but as a real possibility, a blueprint written into the marrow of existence itself. To marry without first becoming this figure is to invite entropy into your life. It is to accept the slow dilution of potency, the erosion of the mind's sharp edges, the softening of ambition into something palatable, something ordinary. And the ordinary man's society's expectation, the compliant citizen, never shapes history. The ordinary man is remembered only in footnotes, if at all. There is an unmistakable thrill in autonomy. There is a clarity in unbroken freedom that cannot exist within the boundaries of obligation. Each decision becomes a reflection of true intent. Each risk taken is a pure investment of energy towards self-defined ends. The unbound man's life is an instrument played with precision, producing harmonies that only the disciplined, sovereign, and awake can hear. And with each chord struck, the world bends, ever so subtly, toward his will. The man who marries before understanding this risks detuning the instrument of his life, inserting disharmony where there could have been brilliance. And yet the path is not devoid of beauty. Even within the orbit of relationships, a man may find depth and resonance, but only if he approaches it from strength, not need, from sovereignty, not dependence, from vision, not comfort. To be whole in solitude is to enter union without weakness. To master yourself is to engage without compromise of essence. To understand your own psychology, to confront shadow, ego, desire, instinct, is to enter any partnership as an equal, unshakable, uncorrupted. And this is why so few men are prepared. The depth of mastery required is rare, almost revolutionary. It demands relentless self-honesty, an unflinching appraisal of motives, and the courage to endure isolation, critique, and the temptation to surrender for ease. Every relationship is a mirror. Every union reveals the corners of your psyche that you have neglected, the edges you have dulled, the shadows you have refused to see. Marriage amplifies these reflections. It is not merely a contract, it is a psychological gauntlet, a test of self-possession. Those who fail do not merely disappoint, they fracture, losing coherence, energy, and clarity. And in the echo of that fracture, the unprepared man becomes diminished, his potential diffused across the expectations and compromises of another. But the man who understands this, the one who sees clearly, takes a different stance. He chooses not out of fear, not out of habit, not out of the social imperative that whispers, "It is time." He chooses only when mastery is complete, when the orbit of his own life is defined, when the core of his essence cannot be touched without his consent. And in that choice, there is no surrender. There is no diminution. There is only alignment with purpose, with vision, with an unwavering trajectory that honors the totality of who he is. History is unkind to the timid and indifferent to the compromised. The legends, the architects of change, the men who leave marks on civilizations do not live for comfort. They live for vision. They live for mastery. They live for the full expression of the self unbound. And the lesson is clear. Before the man binds himself, before he signs the contract that will forever intertwine his trajectory with another's, he must ensure that the trajectory itself is inviolable, that his sovereignty is absolute, that his essence is untouchable. For once surrendered, it may never be reclaimed. And this is the ultimate paradox, the sacred truth. Love, connection, intimacy, they are not enemies. They are not forbidden. They are not denials of greatness, but they are luxuries that demand maturity, mastery, and sovereignty. They are not rewards for the timid. They are extensions of power for the prepared. The man who can love without surrendering his core, who can connect without compromising his vision, who can merge without diluting his sovereignty, he is rare. He is the exception, the archetype, the figure who walks through life unbroken, untouchable, and unbound. And to become this man is the highest challenge, the truest conquest, the ultimate mastery of self. So hear this clearly, as though the world itself is whispering into the marrow of your bones. Do not enter lightly. Do not surrender lightly. Do not allow comfort to masquerade as necessity, desire to masquerade as destiny, or companionship to masquerade as purpose. Master yourself first. Claim your vision. Sharpen your mind. Strengthen your will. Confront your shadow until it bends to your understanding. And then, and only then, may you choose to unite. Not because you must, not because you are expected, but because you are sovereign enough to ensure that union enhances rather than diminishes the totality of your life. The world waits for no man. History honors only the unbound. And in this truth lies both warning and liberation. Marriage is not forbidden, but it is sacred and it is perilous. Treat it as such. Do not enter it as a man who seeks ease, but as a man who has conquered himself, as a man who is unbreakable, as a man whose vision is inviolate. And when that day comes, when union is no longer surrender, but amplification, when love is no longer limitation, but extension, then and only then will the world recognize the full measure of your force. For now, the path is yours alone. Walk it with courage. Walk it with clarity. Walk it with unrelenting intent. Preserve your sovereignty. Protect your vision. Master yourself. And in that mastery, you will discover the power, the freedom, and the intensity that no compromise, no expectation, no societal norm can ever take from you. This is not merely advice. This is law written into the architecture of human existence itself. The unbound man commands life. The unbound man shapes destiny. The unbound man remains untouchable, and the choice always is his. And now, at the edge of everything you know, stand firm. Feel the weight of the world pressing against your mind, your spirit, your very bones, and recognize that it bends only if you allow it. History, society, expectation they are, but shadows, projections, reflections of collective fear. They cannot dictate your trajectory unless you consent. The unbound man, the man who has faced himself fully, who has stared into the abyss of his own potential, he is not touched by the ordinary. He is not moved by convenience, by comfort, by the banal definitions of success others accept without question. Know this: to surrender yourself before mastery is to trade brilliance for the dulling patter of ordinary life. But to master yourself first, to claim the totality of your mind, your vision, your being, this is liberation. This is sovereignty. This is the freedom to enter any union, any relationship, any circumstance without ever being diminished, without ever being bent, without ever being broken. The man who understands this walks through life like a force of nature, unshakable, magnetic, and absolute. He does not seek permission. He does not beg approval. He does not compromise the architecture of his own soul. And in this unwavering clarity, he becomes irresistible not because he seeks to be, but because he cannot help but be. Power, vision, purpose, they are not granted. They are claimed. They are carved from the raw stone of reality with the hammer of discipline, the chisel of self-awareness, and the fire of unrelenting intent. So live as the man who cannot be compromised. Speak as the man whose words are measured, intentional, precise. Love as the man whose capacity to connect amplifies rather than diminishes his power. And when the world, in its endless noise, dares to challenge your sovereignty, smile quietly, for it has forgotten the law. The unbound man bows to nothing but his own mastery. Walk into life fully awake. Walk into relationships fully sovereign. Walk into every moment fully aware that compromise without clarity is slavery, that surrender without mastery is annihilation, that love without power is loss. And in this walking, this being, this living fully, there is triumph, there is liberation, there is the kind of victory that history remembers not in stories of comfort, but in tales of brilliance, force, and the unrelenting pursuit of self-realization. This is your charge. This is your destiny. Do not enter lightly. Do not live lightly. Do not love lightly. Master yourself first. Claim your vision. Protect your sovereignty. Become untouchable. Become unbound. And in that state, you will not merely survive, you will define what it means to exist as a man, fully awake, fully free, and fully alive. The world bows only to those who refuse to be bent, refuse. And with that refusal, you become unstoppable.